A millionaire thought the night had ended perfectly, far from home, far from responsibility. But when he stepped inside his silent house and felt a small toy under his foot, his heart froze. That forgotten object revealed a truth no luxury hotel ever could. Tonight, I hope this story finds you exactly where you are. Whether your heart feels heavy or hopeful, know that every moment you spend here matters. This channel exists because of people like you who still choose empathy over indifference. If this story reminds you that love can grow again, even after mistakes, leave a kind word in the comments. Your presence turns stories into something bigger than words. The night had been flawless, or at least that's what the millionaire kept telling himself as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling window of the luxury hotel, the city glittering below like it existed solely for his approval. Champagne sat sweating on the marble table, untouched now, bubbles dying quietly, the way excitement always did when it stayed too long. He loosened his tie, slipped the wedding ring from his finger, and set it beside his phone, screen face down, where unanswered messages couldn't accuse him of anything. Earlier, the night had felt like victory. The lobby doors opening for him without question, the nods from staff who knew his name, the elevator rising in complete silence as if the building itself respected him. Power had a sound, and it was quiet. The suite smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne, the kind designed to linger in memory long after the man had gone. He poured the champagne himself, not because he needed it, but because the act felt ceremonial, like sealing a decision he'd already made weeks ago. The woman across the room laughed at something on her phone, legs crossed on the edge of the bed, silk dress catching the warm light. She looked at him the way people always did at first, like he was an answer instead of a question. "You ever get tired of all this?" she asked casually, gesturing toward the gloss, the view, the height above everyone else. Her tone suggested admiration, but also curiosity, like she was trying to understand what kind of man could own so much and still look restless. He smiled, the practiced one. "No," he said, after a pause that was just long enough to feel thoughtful. "I earned it." The words sounded right. They always did. He had built his life on them. The deals, the risk, the sleepless nights that turned into press releases and awards. The betrayal, if that's what anyone insisted on calling it, felt smaller by comparison. Almost harmless. Everyone wanted something. He just happened to have more to give. Still, when his phone buzzed again on the table, the sound sliced through the room sharper than it should have. He didn't look at it. He knew what it would be. A reminder. A responsibility. A voice from a world he had decided to step away from for one carefully curated cheating night. He lifted the glass instead, took a slow sip, and let the bitterness settle. Somewhere deep down, a part of him counted the minutes, not until morning, but until this could all be filed away as another controlled mistake. The woman stood and walked toward him, heels clicking softly against the floor. She rested a hand on his chest, felt the steady rhythm there, confident, unbothered. "Relax," she said, smiling. "Tonight's just about us." He nodded, because nodding was easier than explaining that his mind never really stayed in one place anymore. That even here, surrounded by luxury, there was always another room in his head he couldn't lock. Later, when the city lights blurred together and the suite finally went quiet, he dressed quickly. No lingering, no morning after promises. He preferred clean exits. In the mirror, he adjusted his collar, studied his own reflection like a stranger he trusted more than most people. Successful, composed, untouched by consequence. He slipped the ring back onto his finger as the elevator descended, the cool metal settling into place like it always did, as if nothing had happened. The drive home was smooth, empty streets stretching ahead, headlights carving a path through the dark. His driver didn't speak. They never did. The silence felt earned. He checked his phone once, briefly, more out of habit than concern. Missed calls. Messages left unread. He turned the screen off again. He would deal with it tomorrow. That was always tomorrow's problem. His house greeted him the way it always had. Tall gates opening slowly, lights along the driveway glowing soft and obedient. The place was impressive in a way that stopped impressing him years ago. Stone, glass, security cameras that watched everything except what mattered. Inside, the air was still too still, like the house had been holding its breath. He kicked off his shoes, set his keys down, and walked past rooms filled with expensive furniture no one ever really used. That's when he noticed the silence wasn't just late-night quiet. It was different. No distant hum of a television. No soft music drifting from upstairs. No small sounds that reminded him he wasn't alone, even when he felt like it. He frowned slightly, irritation rising before concern ever had a chance. It had been a long night. People slept. This meant nothing. He loosened his jacket and headed down the hallway, already planning the morning, the meetings, the explanations that would smooth everything over. The cheating night would fade into something manageable, a secret folded neatly into the past. He took another step forward and didn't see it until it was too late. The forgotten toy lay in the middle of the hallway floor. Small and out of place, plastic edges pressing sharply against his bare foot. Pain shot up his leg, and he swore under his breath, hopping once before steadying himself. He looked down, ready to kick it aside, annoyed by the inconvenience of it. Then he froze. The toy was scuffed, one wheel missing, its color dulled from being loved too hard. He recognized it instantly. He had bought it months ago on a rushed afternoon, grabbing something bright and loud because he didn't know what else to do. He stared at it now, the image refusing to stay simple. The luxury hotel, the champagne, the women's laughter all felt suddenly far away, like scenes from someone else's life. He bent down slowly and picked it up, turning it over in his hand. It was warm, like it hadn't been there long. His throat tightened, just slightly, enough to irritate him. This wasn't supposed to be here. Not now. Not in the open. The hallway light flickered once, and in that brief moment, standing alone with the forgotten toy in his palm, the millionaire felt something shift, subtle but undeniable, as if the night he thought he controlled had followed him home after all. The house felt larger than it ever had, not because of its size, but because of what was missing. As he stood there in the hallway, the forgotten toy still resting in his hand, the silence pressed in from all sides, thick and heavy, like a question no one was asking out loud. He told himself it was late. Of course it was quiet. Children slept, houses rested, this was normal. Still, he didn't put the toy down right away. He carried it with him as he walked farther inside, his steps slower now, more deliberate. The sharp confidence he'd carried home from the luxury hotel dulling with each passing second. The kitchen lights were off, but the faint glow from the city outside slipped through the windows, casting long shadows across the countertops. A single plate sat in the sink, half-rinsed, a fork resting against the edge, like someone had meant to come back and never did. He frowned, irritation flickering again, quickly masked by rational thought. People forgot things. He forgot things all the time. That was how life worked when you were busy building something bigger than yourself. He set the toy on the counter and reached for a glass, filling it with water he didn't realize he needed until he drank it too fast. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. This time he didn't ignore it. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and felt a strange hollow sensation settle behind his ribs. No missed calls now, no new messages. Just the quiet confirmation that whatever had been trying to reach him earlier had already given up. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, suddenly unsure which outcome he preferred. As he moved through the living room, he noticed the small things he usually stepped over without seeing. A blanket folded on the couch, uneven, like a child had tried to do it alone. Pair of sneakers by the door, one slightly turned inward, the laces still tied. He stopped there longer than he meant to, staring at them as if they might explain something. His jaw tightened. He hadn't told anyone he'd be late. He hadn't told anyone he'd be gone at all. He assumed that was enough. He climbed the stairs slowly, one hand brushing the railing, the house responding with soft creaks that sounded louder than they should have. Halfway up, he caught sight of a drawing taped crookedly to the wall. He didn't remember when it had been put there. Bright colors, uneven lines, a stick-figure version of himself drawn taller than everyone else. A word written across the top in careful, backward letters. Dad. He looked away first, annoyed by the sudden pressure behind his eyes. At the top of the stairs, he paused, listening. Still nothing. No hum of a nightlight. No soft breathing drifting under a door. He walked toward the bedroom he shared with a woman who now felt like a distant obligation, not a presence. The bed was neatly made, untouched, her side empty. That, at least, didn't surprise him. Lately, their schedules had overlapped more in theory than reality. He loosened his shirt, set his jacket over a chair, and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands together like he was warming them after being outside too long. For a moment, he thought about going to sleep, about letting the night end the way he planned, quietly, without reflection. Tomorrow would come, heavy with responsibility and repair, but he had handled worse. He always had. He stood again, though, and stepped back into the hallway, drawn by something he couldn't name. The child's room was down the hall, door closed. That wasn't unusual. What unsettled him was the absence of light spilling from beneath it. He stood there, staring at the door longer than necessary, the memory of the toy pressing against his thoughts like a bruise. He raised his hand as if to knock, then stopped. He didn't knock on doors in his own house. He opened them. That was how control worked. Still, he hesitated. His mind supplied excuses quickly, efficiently. It's late. Don't wake anyone. You'll check in the morning. But the excuses sounded thin even to him. He reached out and turned the handle slowly, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. The door opened to darkness. The room smelled faintly of soap and something sweet, familiar. He flicked on the light and blinked, taking it in. The bed was made too neatly, corners tucked tight. The shelf of toys was organized in a way that felt wrong, like someone else had done it. The stuffed animals sat in a straight line instead of their usual pile. The chair by the window was empty, a book resting face down on the seat. His chest tightened again, sharper this time. He stepped inside, scanning the room, noticing what wasn't there more than what was. The favorite blanket was gone, the one that always dragged along the floor, frayed at the edges. He opened the closet, half expecting to find a small figure curled up inside, the way children sometimes did when they felt forgotten. It was empty. He stood there longer than he meant to, the room too quiet, too still, like it was holding a secret. His phone buzzed again. This time, the sound startled him. He answered without looking at the screen. Yeah? His voice sounded rougher than he expected. There was a pause on the other end, then a familiar voice, tired and cautious. You're home, she said. It wasn't a question. Where are you? He asked, irritation and something else tangled together in his chest. Another pause. Not there, she replied simply. We talked about this. He rubbed his forehead. No, we didn't. She exhaled slowly, and for a moment he imagined her closing her eyes, choosing her words carefully. You said you'd be back early. He waited. He fell asleep on the couch with his toy in his hands. I didn't want to wake him again. His gaze dropped instinctively to the counter downstairs, where the toy still sat. His throat tightened. So where is he? He's with my sister, she said. Just for the night. I didn't want him asking why you weren't coming home again. Again, the word landed harder than he expected. You could have told me. I tried, she said quietly. You didn't answer. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, to explain the importance of the cheating night, the deal, the pressure, the life he was holding together. None of it seemed to fit through the space between his ribs. I'll talk to him tomorrow, he said finally. She didn't respond right away. I hope so, she said, and hung up. He stood alone in the child's room long after the call ended, the weight of the empty bed pressing down on him. The house, once a symbol of everything he'd built, now felt like a stage after the audience had gone home. Downstairs, the forgotten toy waited where he'd left it, silent and patient. A small reminder that some things didn't disappear just because you weren't looking. Before this story goes any further, take a second and tell me something in the comments. What would you do if you were in his place right now? Leave your answer below. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and rate the story so far from 0 to 10. Your support keeps stories like this alive until the very end. He went back downstairs slowly, as if the house might react to sudden movement. Each step felt heavier than the last, not physically, but in the way a decision feels heavy when you know you've avoided it for too long. The toy was still where he'd left it, sitting on the kitchen counter under the dim light, small and unimpressive compared to everything else around it. Marble, steel, glass, money shaped into objects. And yet his eyes went to the toy first, every time, like it had learned how to pull focus. He picked it up again, turning it over in his hands with more care now. One wheel was missing. He remembered when that happened. A Saturday morning, months ago. He had been half-dressed, already checking emails, when a small voice had asked him to watch something really cool. He'd nodded without looking up, and a moment later the toy had crashed into the coffee table leg, plastic snapping softly. He'd apologized then, distracted, promised to fix it later. Later never came. The toy had stayed broken, but it was still used, still loved, still carried around like it worked perfectly. The memory sat in his chest, like a weight he didn't know how to shift. He walked into the living room and lowered himself onto the couch, elbows on his knees, the toy dangling loosely from his fingers. The space felt different now that he was paying attention. Not staged, lived in. The blanket smelled faintly of laundry soap and something warmer, familiar. He pulled it over his lap without thinking, the way muscle memory sometimes moved faster than pride. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message. Just one line. He asked if he'd read to him tomorrow. No accusation. No anger, just information. He stared at the screen longer than necessary, then set the phone down beside him, face up this time, as if daring it to say more. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling, the silence pressing in again, but differently now. Less empty, more expectant. His mind drifted, uninvited, toward the hotel room earlier that night. The quiet confidence. The way he'd convinced himself that nothing followed him home. That he could separate parts of his life cleanly, like rooms with doors he could lock. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, short and humorless. He had always underestimated how far small things could travel. He stood abruptly, restless energy pushing him back to his feet, and walked toward the hallway again. The toy stayed in his hand this time. He didn't know why, only that putting it down felt wrong, like abandoning it twice. The hallway light flickered as he passed, casting his shadow long and distorted on the wall. For a moment, it looked like someone else entirely. Taller, thinner, a stranger wearing his shape. He stopped in front of the child's room again. The door was still open, the light still on, the emptiness unchanged. He stepped inside, slower than before, as if the room might react to his presence now that he was really looking. He knelt by the bed, running his hand over the neatly tucked sheets. Too neat, like someone had tried to make it easier to leave. That thought hit harder than he expected, sharp and sudden. He placed the toy gently on the pillow, right where a small hand would have reached for it without thinking. The image formed fully in his mind this time, no longer blurry or distant. Waiting on the couch, eyes heavy, fighting sleep because someone had promised to come home. He swallowed, his throat tight, and stood again. On the desk by the window, a piece of paper caught his eye. Folded once, placed carefully, not hidden, but not obvious either. He hesitated before picking it up, a strange sense of dread curling low in his stomach. It wasn't a note, not exactly. It was a drawing, the same uneven lines, the same bright colors. This one showed a house, big and tall, with windows lit up like stars. A smaller figure stood outside it, holding something round and red. The toy. Above it, in careful, slightly crooked letters, were the words for later. He sat heavily in the desk chair, the drawing shaking slightly in his hands. For later. He repeated the phrase silently, tasting it. He had lived his life for later. Later meetings. Later calls. Later apologies. He had built an empire on postponement, on believing that what mattered would wait until he was ready to notice it. His phone buzzed again, breaking the moment. He answered without looking. "I see it," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "He wanted you to." Another pause, then softer. "He didn't cry. He just asked if you were busy again." The word again landed between them, heavy and unavoidable. He closed his eyes briefly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. This time, it sounded less like a promise, and more like a plea. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was careful. "Tomorrow matters," she said. "But so does what you do after." The line went dead, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. He remained seated for a long moment, the drawing on the desk, the toy on the bed, the room filled with the quiet aftermath of choices finally catching up. He looked around once more, taking it all in, not as background noise this time, but as evidence. When he stood to leave, he took the toy with him again. He didn't know where to put it yet. He only knew he didn't want it out of sight. As he turned off the light and closed the door behind him, the house seemed to exhale, the silence shifting once more. This time, it wasn't empty or expectant. It was waiting. Sleep never came, not really. He lay in the master bedroom staring at the ceiling, long after the house had settled into its deepest quiet, the toy resting on the knitstand where a glass of water usually sat. Every time he closed his eyes, images pushed in uninvited. The hallway, the empty bed, the drawing with its crooked letters, for later. The words echoed louder the longer he stayed still, until stillness itself felt like another form of avoidance. Sometime after midnight, he got up again. He didn't bother checking the clock. Time felt irrelevant now, stretched thin and useless. He padded down the stairs barefoot, the cool floor grounding him in a way nothing else had all night. The house greeted him with the same hollow calm, but this time he didn't try to rationalize it away. He moved through the rooms slowly, deliberately, as if retracing steps might reveal something he'd missed. He stopped in front of the child's room once more. The door was closed now. He was sure he'd left it open. The handle reflected the hallway light, smooth and untouched, like it was guarding something fragile on the other side. He stood there longer than before, his hand hovering inches from the knob. The simple act of opening a door had never felt so heavy. He told himself it was ridiculous. The room was empty. He already knew that. Nothing had changed in the last few hours, except his willingness to see it. Still, his hand didn't move. The memory of earlier, of stepping into that silence unprepared, lingered like a warning. He realized then that this wasn't about the room anymore. It was about what the door represented. A line he'd crossed too many times without noticing. He turned the knob slowly. It didn't budge. For a second, confusion replaced everything else. He tried again, firmer this time. Locked. The word landed with a dull thud in his chest. The room had never been locked before. There had never been a need. He leaned closer, pressing his ear lightly against the door, listening for something. Anything. There was nothing. No movement. No breathing. Just the faint hum of the house itself, distant and indifferent. He stepped back, frustration flaring hot and sudden. He knocked once, sharply, the sound echoing down the hallway. "Hey," he said, his voice louder than he meant it to be. No response. He knocked again, softer this time, the edge gone. "It's me." The words felt strange in his mouth, like they belonged to someone else. Still nothing. He reached into his pocket for his phone, then stopped. Calling someone from outside, a locked door in his own house, felt absurd. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping again in front of the door. The toy was still in his other hand, its small weight a constant reminder. He set it gently on the floor by the door, as if leaving proof that he'd been there. Minutes passed, maybe longer. He didn't know. The house stayed quiet, unresponsive. Finally, reluctantly, he turned away. There was nothing to do now. Not tonight. The realization tasted bitter, unfamiliar. He wasn't used to waiting. He returned to the living room and sank onto the couch, staring at the dark window where his reflection stared back at him. He barely recognized the man looking out from the glass. He looked smaller somehow, less certain, stripped of the confidence that usually filled every space he occupied. He rubbed his hands together, then reached for his phone again, scrolling aimlessly, not reading anything, just filling the space. A message came through, not from her, from her sister. "He's asleep. Don't come tonight." He read it twice, then a third time, irritation rising, then dissolving into something duller. He typed a response, deleted it, typed again. "I just wanted to say goodnight." It looked weak. He erased it. He settled on nothing, setting the phone down without replying. The hours crawled. At some point, he must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, pale light filtered through the windows, turning the room a soft gray. Morning. He sat up slowly, his body stiff, his mind immediately snapping back to awareness. The door. The lock. He stood quickly, heart beating faster than it should have, and walked back to the hallway. The toy was still there, right where he'd left it, waiting outside the door like a question mark. He picked it up and stood there again, listening. Nothing. He tried the handle. Still locked. He knocked once more, gentler this time, more hopeful than demanding. "It's morning," he said quietly. The words echoed back at him, empty. His phone buzzed in his hand, making him flinch. This time it was her. He answered immediately. "Why is the door locked?" he asked, skipping everything else. There was a pause. "Because he asked me to," she said. "He said it helps him sleep." His throat tightened. "Since when?" "Since he started waking up looking for you." The honesty in her voice left no room for defense. He leaned his forehead against the door, eyes closed, the cool wood pressing against his skin. He could picture it now, a small body sitting up in bed, eyes scanning the room, waiting, over and over. He squeezed the toy in his hand, plastic creaking softly. "I didn't know," he said finally. The words sounded inadequate the moment they left his mouth. "I know," she replied. But not knowing doesn't change how it feels to him. Silence stretched between them, heavier than before. "He'll unlock it later," she added. "When he wakes up." "When is that?" he asked. She hesitated. "When he feels ready." The call ended, leaving him standing there, alone in the hallway, the locked door between him and a space he used to walk into without thinking. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, the toy resting in his lap. The house was awake now, filled with light, but it felt more distant than ever. He stayed there longer than he meant to, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of the door, the lock, the choices that had led here. For the first time in years, he understood what it meant to be shut out, not by force, but by trust that had learned how to protect itself. He left the hallway sometime later, not because he felt finished, but because sitting on the floor outside a locked door no longer felt like penance, just paralysis. The house had fully woken up now. Morning light spilled through the windows, bright and honest, exposing everything the night had tried to soften. Dust on the shelves, a fingerprint on the glass table. The reality he usually edited out with speed and distraction. He showered without really feeling the water, dressed without caring what he chose. The suit felt wrong, too sharp for a morning like this, so he changed into jeans and a sweater he hadn't worn in years. It smelled faintly of detergent and something older, something domestic. He welcomed that more than he expected. The phone stayed in his hand as he paced the kitchen, checking it without purpose, hoping for a message that would tell him what to do next. None came. He made coffee and forgot to drink it. He sat at the table and stood again. Every movement felt like a placeholder, a way to avoid the thing waiting for him just beyond the front door. When the message finally arrived, it was brief. You can come now. No punctuation. No warmth, just permission. The drive felt longer than it should have. He obeyed every speed limit, stopped fully at every sign, as if carefulness might earn him something. The neighborhood was quieter than his own. Smaller houses, trees closer together, sidewalks worn smooth by years of ordinary life. He parked and sat for a moment with the engine off, staring at the windshield, gathering himself the way he used to before big meetings. This felt bigger. The door opened before he could knock. Her sister stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She stepped aside without greeting him. He's in the back, she said, not asking if he wanted to see him. Assuming. He followed the sound of quiet movement, passing family photos on the wall, birthdays, holidays, moments he recognized because he'd been present in theory, if not always in practice. They ended at a small bedroom, sunlight streaming in through sheer curtains, dust motes floating lazily in the air. The door was open, unlocked. The room looked different than he expected, smaller, warmer, lived in. Toys lined one wall, not organized, but scattered the way they were meant to be. A half-built structure sat on the floor, abandoned mid-idea. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted, pillow on the floor. This room hadn't been prepared for him. That was the first thing he noticed. His child sat on the floor with his back turned, focused intently on something in his hands. He didn't look up when the man stepped inside. The silence stretched, fragile and unfamiliar. He cleared his throat softly. Hey. No response. The child shifted slightly, but didn't turn around. He took a step closer, then stopped, suddenly unsure of the rules. He knelt instead, lowering himself to the child's level, heart pounding in a way boardrooms had never managed. I brought this, he said, holding out the toy. The broken wheel caught the light. The child's shoulders tensed. Slowly, cautiously, the child turned. His eyes flicked to the toy, then away. It's broken, he said matter-of-factly. I know, the man replied. I was going to fix it. You said that before. The words weren't angry. That was somehow worse. They were flat, observational, like stating a fact that had already been catalogued and accepted. The man swallowed. I did, he said, and I should have. The child studied him for a long moment, head tilted slightly, as if evaluating whether this was new information or recycled noise. Then he turned back to what he was doing, the conversation seemingly over. The man stayed where he was, unsure whether to speak again or wait. He watched small hands move with careful precision, placing one piece, adjusting another. He noticed the concentration, the patience. Traits he liked to think he'd passed down, though he hadn't been around enough to be sure. "I stepped on this last night," he said quietly, holding up the toy again. "It hurt." The child glanced at it. "It's not for stepping," he said. "It's for later." The phrase hit him square in the chest. He nodded slowly. "I know." There was a pause. Then, without looking up, the child asked, "Were you busy?" The question was simple. No accusation. No drama, just curiosity. The man felt the familiar urge to explain, to justify, to frame the cheating night as something necessary and separate. He resisted it with more effort than any deal he'd ever negotiated. "Yes," he said, "I was." The child placed another piece down, then another. "You're always busy." The man closed his eyes briefly. "I don't want to be," he said. The truth surprised him as it left his mouth. "I just didn't know how to stop." The child finally turned fully toward him then, eyes searching his face for something. "Mom says doors are for when people need space," he said. "I needed space." "I understand," the man replied, though he wasn't sure he did. "I'm sorry I made you need that." The child considered this, then nodded once, like someone checking a box. He reached for the toy, taking it gently, examining the broken wheel. "You can fix it," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a test. "I will," the man said. This time, he meant it without attaching a timeline. The child stood, carrying the toy to the bed and setting it carefully at the center, like it belonged there. He climbed up beside it and patted the space next to him. "Sit," he said. The invitation felt heavier than forgiveness. The man sat, careful not to crowd him, hands resting awkwardly on his knees. They sat in silence for a moment, the room filled with the soft sounds of the neighborhood outside. A dog barking, a car passing. Life unremarkable and steady. "You can read later," the child said, lying back. "Not now." "Okay," the man replied, a small smile tugging at his mouth despite everything. As he sat there, the weight of the night, the luxury hotel, the cheating night that had felt so controlled and separate, all of it collapsed inward. He had expected anger, tears, consequences that looked like punishment. What he found instead was something quieter and far more difficult. Trust that hadn't vanished, but had learned how to protect itself. Innocence that didn't accuse, but remembered. He stayed until the child fell asleep, breathing slow and even, one hand resting lightly on the broken toy. When he finally stood to leave, careful not to wake him, he felt the shift again, subtle but real. This wasn't an ending. It wasn't absolution. It was an opening. And for the first time, he wasn't sure whether stepping through it would cost him more than he could afford, or give him something he'd already lost. He didn't leave right away. Even after the child's breathing settled into a steady rhythm, even after the room grew quieter, softer, he remained seated at the edge of the bed, staring at the small rise and fall of a chest that had learned to sleep without waiting. The broken toy rested beside the child's hand, fingers curled around it loosely, as if even in sleep it was something that needed guarding. He felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. This was the part of the night he hadn't planned for. Not regret, exactly. Something deeper. Something heavier. When he finally stood, he moved carefully, as if the floor itself might protest. The sister met him in the hallway, arms no longer crossed, expression softened but guarded. "He's okay," she said quietly. It wasn't reassurance. It was a boundary. "I know," he replied. "Thank you." The words felt small, inadequate, but they were all he had. The drive back was quieter than the one before. No rehearsed speeches. No imagined outcomes. Just the steady hum of the engine and the weight of thoughts he could no longer keep organized. His phone buzzed several times. Emails, missed calls, people who expected answers. He didn't respond. For the first time in years, ignoring them didn't feel like power. It felt like necessity. When he reached his house, it looked different in daylight. Less impressive, more exposed. The gates opened automatically, but the gesture felt hollow now, a routine that no longer impressed its owner. Inside, the silence returned, but it no longer surprised him. It simply existed, a neutral presence waiting to be filled or respected. He went straight to the kitchen and picked up the toy from the counter, turning it over again, studying the damage with new eyes. The missing wheel wasn't complicated. It wasn't irreparable. It just required time, patience, attention. Things he had always claimed to have, yet rarely gave where they mattered most. He sat at the table and pulled the drawing from his pocket, smoothing it out carefully, for later. He traced the letters with his fingertip, remembering all the times he'd used those words without meaning to. Later, after the call. Later, after the deal. Later, when things slowed down. Later had always been a place he believed in, a promise he never intended to break. And yet, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the woman he'd spent the cheating night with. Last night was amazing. When can I see you again? He stared at the screen longer than necessary, the words feeling foreign now, disconnected from the reality sitting across from him at the table. He typed a response, deleted it, typed again. Finally, he locked the phone and set it aside without answering. He stood and walked through the house, not with the restless pacing of earlier, but slowly, deliberately, noticing things he'd ignored for years. A family photo slightly crooked on the wall. A calendar still marked with reminders he'd never kept. He paused in front of a mirror and studied his reflection. The armor he wore so well in public felt thinner here, cracked in places he couldn't ignore. The confident posture, the practiced expression, all of it felt performative now, like something he'd learned rather than earned. He thought back to the early years, before the titles, before the assistants and the drivers and the constant urgency. He remembered reading bedtime stories on the floor because he'd been too tired to make it to the bed. Remembered laughing when the voices came out wrong. Remembered a time when being needed felt like privilege instead of inconvenience. Somewhere along the way, he'd started confusing importance with distance. The afternoon stretched on quietly. He didn't go to the office, didn't call anyone to explain. He sat at the table with a small toolkit he'd found in a drawer, pieces spread out carefully. He worked slowly, testing the fit, adjusting, failing once, then trying again. When the wheel finally snapped into place, he felt a small, unexpected surge of relief. Not pride, relief. As if something inside him had loosened its grip just enough to breathe. He set the repaired toy in the center of the table and stared at it, the simplicity of the task humbling. It hadn't required money, or connections, or influence, just presence. Just showing up and staying long enough to finish something. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was her. He answered, holding the phone loosely, not bracing himself the way he usually did. I fixed it, he said before she could speak. There was a pause. Fixed what? She asked. The toy, he replied. The one he loves. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, she said quietly. I didn't know how much I was missing, he continued, surprising himself with the honesty in his own voice. I thought I did, but I didn't. She exhaled softly. Knowing now doesn't undo before. I know, he said, but I wanted to change what comes after. Silence stretched between them, not tense this time, but cautious. He believes you, she said finally. That doesn't mean he'll forget. I'm not asking him to, the man replied. I just don't want to be someone he needs a locked door from. The words hung in the air, fragile and exposed. Tomorrow, she said. Come earlier. I will, he replied without hesitation. When the call ended, he remained seated, hands resting on the table beside the toy. Outside, the light shifted as afternoon gave way to evening, the house filling with long shadows that felt less threatening than before. He knew this wasn't redemption. He knew the cracks in his armor wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time, he wasn't reaching for the armor to hide behind it. He was setting it down, piece by piece, unsure of what would be left without it, but finally willing to find out. He stood as the sun dipped lower, picked up the toy, and placed it carefully by the door, ready for later. Not the later he used to promise. A closer one. One that required him to be present, not perfect. And as the house grew quiet again, it no longer felt empty. It felt like a space waiting to be filled the right way. He arrived earlier the next day, earlier than he ever had before, parking on the street instead of the driveway, as if reducing the distance between the car and the door might mean something. The repaired toy sat on the passenger seat beside him, clean now, wheels spinning smoothly when he nudged it with his thumb. He watched it for a moment before getting out, feeling the strange calm that had settled over him since the night before. Not relief, not confidence. Just a quiet awareness that whatever happened next would matter more than what he said about it later. The door opened after a short knock. Her sister stepped aside without comment, but this time there was no edge in her posture, just caution. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and toast, ordinary and grounding. The sound of a cartoon drifted faintly from the back room, low enough to be background noise rather than a distraction. He's awake, she said, in a good mood. Then, after a pause, for now. He nodded, accepting the condition that came with the information. He moved slowly through the house, not wanting to rush the moment, not wanting to startle anyone into retreat. The child sat on the floor again, legs crossed, focused on the screen, laughter bubbling up at something he found funny. When he noticed the man standing there, the laughter didn't stop, but it softened. You came early, the child said. I did, the man replied. Like I said I would. The child studied him for a moment, then pointed to the toy. Is it fixed? The man knelt and handed it over. The child turned it in his hands, tested the wheel, pushed it gently across the floor. It rolled smoothly. He smiled, quick and unguarded, and caught himself glancing up as if checking whether that was allowed. Thank you, the child said, quietly this time. The words landed heavier than praise ever had. You're welcome, the man replied. They sat together on the floor, the cartoon forgotten, the toy moving back and forth between them without urgency. The man let the silence stretch, resisting the urge to fill it with explanations. Eventually, the child spoke again. Mom says you're trying. I am, the man said. I know that doesn't fix everything. The child nodded, accepting the complexity without comment. Children often did, he realized, until adults taught them not to. Later, while the child colored at the table, her sister pulled him aside into the kitchen. You should know something, she said, voice low. This didn't start last night. The door. The toy. None of it. He leaned against the counter, listening. I figured, he said. He started leaving things out on purpose, she continued. Shoes in the hallway, toys by the door. At first, we thought he was just being messy. But then he said it made it easier to tell if you'd been there. The words settled slowly, painfully. Evidence. A system. He closed his eyes briefly. I didn't see it. No, she said gently. You didn't. She hesitated, then added, he also started packing a bag, just in case. The room felt smaller suddenly. "A bag," he repeated. "Nothing dramatic," she said quickly. "Just his favorite things. The toy, the blanket, a book. He said it was for sleepovers." She paused, but he kept it by the door. The man nodded, the image forming clearly now. A small bag, ready, prepared, not abandoned, but prepared to leave without fuss. The idea cut deeper than anger ever could have. When he returned to the table, the child looked up. "Are you leaving again?" he asked, not accusing, just checking. "Not today," the man said. "I have the whole day." The child smiled faintly and went back to coloring. The man watched him, noticing the careful way he stayed close to the door, even while sitting. A habit formed quietly, logically, without drama. Later that afternoon, they walked to the park together. The man pushed the swing, higher than he probably should have, laughing when the child demanded more. Other parents watched, some curious, some indifferent. No one knew who he was here. No one cared. The anonymity felt like relief. On a bench nearby, she watched them, arms folded loosely, not defensively, just thoughtfully. When the child ran off to the slide, she sat beside the man. "He told me something last night," she said. He waited. "He said the toy was brave," she continued, "because it waited on the floor, even when it got stepped on." The man swallowed. "What did you say?" "I told him bravery isn't about staying where you get hurt," she said. "It's about knowing when to move." They sat in silence, the weight of the truth settling between them. He looked out at the park, at the ordinary chaos of families moving together, and understood then that the truth he'd been avoiding wasn't about the cheating night, or the luxury hotel, or the woman who made him feel powerful for a few hours. It was about the slow accumulation of absences. The way children adapted. The way love learned to protect itself when promises didn't. As the sun dipped lower, the child ran back to them, breathless and smiling. "Can we come back tomorrow?" he asked. The man looked at her. She didn't answer for him. She waited. "Yes," he said finally. "If you want to." The child nodded, satisfied, and ran ahead toward the car, not checking this time to see if he was following. The man stood there for a moment, watching him go, the truth clear now in a way it had never been before. He hadn't almost lost his family because of one bad night. He'd almost lost them because he thought later was guaranteed. And now, standing there with nothing left to avoid, he knew the final question wasn't whether he loved them. It was whether he was willing to become someone who could stay. He didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the restless, frantic kind of sleeplessness that had followed him for years. It was quieter now, reflective, like his mind was finally doing the work it had postponed for too long. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the small moments of the day instead of the big ones. The way the toy rolled smoothly across the floor. The way the child hadn't checked to see if he was watching before running ahead. The way silence no longer felt like punishment, but like space being made. Just before dawn, he got up. The house was still dark, the world outside barely beginning to breathe again. He moved through the hallway instinctively, stopping in front of the child's room without fully realizing he was doing it. The door was closed. Not locked this time, just closed. He rested his hand on the knob and felt something tighten in his chest, an old reflex that hadn't yet learned it wasn't needed anymore. He turned the handle and stepped inside. The room looked different again, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't empty. It wasn't untouched. It was lighter. The bed was made, but loosely, the way a child might do it when trying but not trying too hard. The shelves weren't bare, just less crowded. Some toys were gone. The blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The repaired toy sat on the desk, upright, wheel facing the door, as if it had been positioned intentionally. On the bed, right in the center, was a small backpack. His heart skipped, then steadied, then skipped again. He approached slowly, every instinct screaming to brace for impact. He unzipped it carefully, as if the sound alone might undo something fragile. Inside were a few clothes, rolled tightly. A book with a bent corner. The blanket folded smaller than he remembered. And a piece of paper, folded once, placed right on top. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. The handwriting was careful, uneven, but deliberate. "I'm staying at Aunt's house for a little while. Not because I don't love you. Because I need you to come when you say you will. I'll come back when it's easier to believe." The words blurred for a moment before he realized his eyes were filling. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the letter resting in his lap, the meaning sinking in slowly, fully. This was the secret the night had been carrying. Not abandonment. Not punishment. A boundary, drawn gently but firmly by someone small enough to need protection, yet brave enough to ask for it. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the house wake up around him, the hum of the refrigerator, a car passing outside, life continuing, indifferent to his internal reckoning. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to fix this immediately. There was nothing to undo. This wasn't a mess. It was a choice, one that deserved respect. Later that morning, he drove without thinking about speed or time, the letter folded carefully in his pocket. When he arrived, the door opened before he knocked. The child stood there, backpack no longer in sight, hair still messy from sleep, eyes alert and searching. "You found it," the child said. "I did," the man replied, kneeling down. "Thank you for telling me." The child nodded, serious. "Mom said you'd understand if you really tried." He swallowed. She was right. They sat together on the couch, close, but not pressed together, the distance between them intentional. "I'm not going anywhere," the man said. "Not today, not tomorrow. Not when it's inconvenient." The child looked at him carefully. "You don't have to say everything," he said. "You just have to come." The simplicity of it broke something open inside him. "I can do that," he said softly. From the kitchen, she watched them, arms wrapped loosely around herself. Not tense, not hopeful, just present. When their eyes met, there was no accusation there, just recognition. He stood and walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. "I understand now," he said. "About the door. About the space." She nodded. "It wasn't to keep you out," she said. "It was to keep him safe." "I know," he replied. "I want to earn my way back in." Slowly. She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside, opening the door wider. Not a grand gesture, just enough. The day unfolded quietly. Breakfast together, a walk. A story read without checking the time. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just consistency, awkward at first, then easier. When evening came, and it was time for him to leave, the child walked him to the door. "You're coming tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," the man said. "Early?" The child smiled, satisfied, and closed the door gently behind him. Not locked, just closed. As he stood on the porch, the weight of everything that had happened finally settled. Not as guilt, but as clarity. The cheating night, the luxury hotel, the illusion of control he'd clung to for so long, all of it felt distant now, small in comparison to what had nearly been lost. It wasn't the betrayal that had changed everything in the end. It was a toy left on the floor. A door closed softly. A child brave enough to ask for better. He walked to his car slowly, not in a hurry to escape, not afraid to stay. And for the first time in a very long time, the world didn't feel like something he had to conquer. It felt like something he could finally be part of again.